Hello there, a very good evening and welcome to another edition of Face to Face. Of course, we've dedicated quite a lot of time on Face to Face to discuss Sri Lanka's economy, Sri Lanka's future path, and especially Sri Lanka's recovery from the crisis that we faced just a few years ago. Of course, the general public are now feeling the brunt of the blow given the payment of taxes, the rise in personal income taxes, and many other taxes that were raised as well. The people are feeling the weight of the economic crisis that we faced, although we are recovering to a certain degree. Now, to discuss these matters and much more, we've got with us Dhananath Fernando, who is no stranger to the show. Dhananath, a very good evening. Thank you very much for taking time off your busy schedule and joining us on Face to Face. Dhananath, before we get into the statistics and, of course, all the numbers that you've crunched at your think tank, I would like to start off with a trend that we're seeing again now. We've seen time and time again the subject of racism and communal tensions come up. Sri Lanka is no stranger to these incidents, and we've seen what they've done to the people in this country, how people have lost their lives, how families have been uprooted, and how communal tensions, of course, led to the 30-year-long war. We see certain incidents cropping up here and there, and with the availability of social media, of course, and the freedom of speech in Sri Lanka, anyone can say anything. I'd like to first pose a question to you as to how this kind of a trend could affect the economy of Sri Lanka and how it has affected the economy of Sri Lanka, because I think it's important that our viewers are aware of what they're getting themselves into, because there might be some people who actually believe that there is a threat to certain religions, certain communal groups in Sri Lanka, and therefore they pursue that line of thinking. But how do these instabilities, as far as communal tensions in Sri Lanka is concerned, translate to economic damage or maybe even economic prosperity, as to how you think?
Thanks, Shaleen. Thank you for having me. I can answer that question in 2 words: extremely bad. But I would like to elaborate a bit more, because why it is extremely bad. If you recall the incidents that took place, even the Digana riots and things that took afterwards, then it can explode to a isolated incident that can completely derail all the economic progress, even the little progress that we have done over a fraction of seconds.
Okay.
Because the reality is we are not still out of woods. We have reached the economic stability, but we are at a very vulnerable place where even a climate event or one isolated incident which was basically heated up from this sort of a communal disharmony can completely disrupt everything that we have achieved. It can be bad as an economic crisis, one incident, because as we all know, our success of our recovery has been mainly because of tourism and to an extent through remittances.
Okay.
And the moment some disruption takes place, all these channels will close down.
Okay.
And then I need not to explain then what is going to happen for the currency, and then what is going to happen for the inflation and all that.
It's a domino effect.
There will be a massive domino effect. That's number one. Number two, we have to forget completely about the investors. Number two. Number three is, Shaleen, taking some lessons from the past. There are 2 reasons why people leave Sri Lanka. One is for political reasons. That episode that we saw, the 30-year-long war that you explain and all that. And for political reasons, when people leave, even it's very difficult to get them back, because the memory is quite unpleasant. No one really want to associate with a bad memory. They have lost their houses, their loved ones, so they really not coming back. Even with the greatest difficulty, even the second generation, third generation, hardly they come back. When people leave for economic reasons, at least there's a chance. They leave for economic reasons and they really want to come back and contribute back. That was the recent migration trend that we have, and we are not in a position to lose out our people again for political or religious reasons, because it's already we are having a labor shortage and our population is declining. We are losing the best talent, and how can we afford another tension for people to leave the country on one side, and also the worst type of migration So this is going to extremely, if we should not allow to escalate it, and I think we all should act responsibly, because that time has gone, and we are having we have much bigger challenges ahead. Our population is aging, our dependency ratio is going up, so how are we going to afford another ethnic, religious, racial tension, because we had enough of that for the last 30-40 years.
Also, Dhananath, to keep on track with what's happening right now, some of the latest developments. Today, a new program was launched by the government to allow for card payments, bank card payments for buses. I remember this topic of bank card payments being used for buses cropped up several times in the past, never really materialized. I have never had the opportunity to pay my bus fare with a bank card, but today we saw it being launched, and we saw passengers paying their bus fares through bank cards. Now, initially this is being launched only for private buses, several routes, mainly centered around the Markamara Multimodal Center. But I did see some kind of a pushback from the Private Bus Owners Association, and one of their main concerns was that the use of bank cards, of course, entails a certain commission going to the banks, somewhere around 1%, give or take a few. Is this a justifiable reason to object to this? Is there a way to resolve this and then maybe get everybody on board?
Definitely the way forward is through digitization, and we have to have that tap and go system. And I'm glad that at least it has initiated as a pilot project. This is long overdue. There was a project called Sirasa, and there were multiple attempts, but I think this time it's moving for the pilot stage, and I think it's important that we implement it across the board. Of course, there are bank charges and there are different structures, which how we have to look at it is, Charlene, not only from the bus owner's side but also from the banker's side, and to have sort of a market approach to it, because anyway for a payment there will be some charges, because there has to be a system to be implemented. There has to be some charges.
There's a cost for the bank.
There's a cost for the bank. At the same time, there will be benefit for the bus owners as well, because you are improving the productivity. If you have ever traveled, the viewers on a public transport, they have seen like what's the mess that, a conductor going in the middle of the bus, he's shouting, he's pushing people, and he's asking, he really cannot keep. One of the main problems they had was they really could not take account of who actually bought the ticket. They were supposed to give a ticket, but it was a very unsafety environment that they issue a ticket, because he was standing, the bus was going, and so all sorts of issues can be sorted. So definitely the digitization is the way forward. My worry is, I think my concern is, it's not adequate enough. This has to be a more...
It's not large enough, the project.
Not, exactly, the project is not large enough. Actually, you should have like one card which is connected with a lot of routes where you tap and go for an example, you are not taking the card only to buses. For an example, the transport ecosystem works, you probably take a tuk-tuk to the bus halt, and probably from there you take the train, and from there for the last mile again you may be taking the another tuk or a cab or a bus. So it will be a combination of lot of transport services,
and of course payments to highways.
So ideally you should have like one card where you can use, or like you actually give, or it's a QR code that you scan from the phone that you do, because then
it doesn't really have to be a physical card anymore.
Absolutely. So that's the way forward, because otherwise for your tuk you give it in cash if they don't accept the cards. Otherwise you put it on the card, and then for the bus you use your card, and for the train you take the ticket. But we understand it's the pilot project, so it has to be larger enough where we can incorporate. But the public transportation reform, Charlene, is a completely, a new topic where a lot of aspects has to be considered. But card is a good start. But overall we have to look at how we can incorporate all of them. But also on the other side, people who drive their personal vehicles, there has to be an option that they park the vehicle, and
they can pay for that.
They can pay for it, and then there's parking facilities available, or like they get into another public transport mode, and there's a roster.
Because I can vouch for the fact that there are several people who are scamming people who are parking on the side of the road. You get people who are not officials of whatever company or the municipal council that are supposed to collect that money, coming and collecting money from people, not even issuing a receipt.
Absolutely. So there has to be like incentive schemes where if you park in a a proper parking facility where some of those parking fees can be claimed when you are using the public transport. So it is entirely a new ecosystem, and that definitely has to be a digitized form, and the benefit will also be for the bus owners, because they can improve productivity. I can give you a classic example. I was using a staff transport to commute to work at one point, and the productivity factor was amazing, because the bus, generally the bus has to fill two people, because the driver and the conductor. So in the staff transport they had an automatic door, so basically it's the driver who basically, unlike in another country,
in foreign countries, he opens the door.
He opens the door by just a pressing of a button. So by doing that, he has cut down the labor cost by half, because now you need not to pay an additional salary and all that. And if the door can be opened by the tapping of the card, even better. So that's the way that we have to look at, because then there's a massive saving for the bus owner or the driver, because now you have basically cut down some of your expenditure because of the card. So that may be much, I mean, even if you are giving a small commission to the bank, you're saving from the labor and paying EPF, ETF, all that has to be paid. But your labor cost can be basically brought down if you implement it properly. But of course the buses has to be upgraded, it has to be low flow buses. That's why I said it's a big reform that we are speaking about. But definitely the payment side is one channel that we have to focus, and there's definitely an economics to it, including the bus lanes and all that. There's economics to it, that there's transport economics behind it, but this is a good start.
Dhananath, I think the last time we had a discussion on the budget, this year's budget, you told me that there wasn't too much information out there, there wasn't too much material put out by the government as to what they plan on bringing in the budget proposal. The budget is out now. You've seen this budget being debated. Several expenditure heads were debated in Parliament. What's your take in general about the direction that this government is trying to pursue?
I think it's the good thing about the budget is there are no surprises in the expenditure side and also on the revenue side.
That's a good thing.
That's a good thing, because every time, if you recall, Charlene, every time when we are getting closer to a budget, everyone gets a shock, because they are not buying vehicles. The people who bought vehicles are in shock. Banks are concerned. Everyone is concerned whether the taxes will go up or down, or fuel prices, what would happen. Now there's nothing. That's the part of the stability that we all speak about, the policy continuity and long-term projection. So that's the basis. Budget should not have any shocks. So that has been adhered by the government.
So either positive or negative, like massive increases in salaries, not good.
Not good, because then you completely disrupt the entire market, because when you increase the salaries, for example, for the public sector, of course that demand is going to come for the private sector, and then they have to again, and every year when this starts happening, it's very difficult. Even if you recall, like how many times we increase the VAT, decrease the VAT and all that, it's very difficult to adjust, and also it opens room for corruption. So the good thing is there are no major surprises on either on the expenditure side or in the revenue side, which is a very good thing. What could have been done is, President shared, or as the Minister of Finance, aspirations like he wants to achieve 7% economic growth, percentages on indirect taxes to direct taxes, reforms to be done. But I think if it was more explanatory about how he is going to achieve those targets, it could have been better. But overall, it's a sensible budget. They are going to stick to the IMF pretty much program. It doesn't mean again the IMF is the solution for all problems, but because if we derail from the program, it will be a bigger challenge for Sri Lanka. And also President also, as Sri Lanka had a framework that we have to adhere for, because one side you have to adhere with the IMF commitments on one side. On the second side, we have to also look at the income and expenditure and manage politics. Third is mainly looking at economic growth. So all three has to be balanced.
Because we have to start repaying our debts in
Absolutely. From 2000, we are already paying debt, but I think slowly the payment amount is going to increase over a period of time, and now we are going to consider issuing the first foreign debt for the local banks starting in early mid December. So those debt will all accumulate over a period of time, including the interest. So I think it's a reasonable budget. What what could have been for area for improvement could have been that you explain the policy reforms and accelerate it further. Is what could have been done, because some of the proposals you can see it's repetitive. For an example, also in fairness to Finance Ministry's point of view, because they presented the first budget in February, so it's after about 7-8 months they are presenting the second budget. So there's limited time frame that that has been there, but I think if we had more growth oriented policy reforms, that doesn't cost a lot, because these are the reforms that is required. You have to give a policy direction to the investors that could have been improved, but overall I don't see a lot of surprises, which I consider a good thing.
Another major accusation that was coming from the opposition towards the government was the fact that the first budget that was presented by this government, they have not really spent the money that has been allocated. Now, I believe the response from the government, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but this is what I gathered by listening to the speakers in Parliament. The response from the government was the fact that, well, we've launched several projects and the payments for those projects are done in certain quantums, and those quantums haven't been reached yet. Say, for example, payment is done after 3 months after the launch of the project, or 4 months, or 5 months, and that is part of the reason why the money has still not gone out of the treasury or being spent, to put it quite frankly. What's the reality here?
So historical data shows, Charlene, that most of the time the government spends more than their budget.
Okay.
They earn less than their budget. So there's always a increasing budget deficit.
Okay.
And when they have more expenditure, how they curtail the expenditure is cutting down their capital expenditure.
Okay.
Even if you go back to about 3-4 years back, every time the capex being curtailed, just to manage at least to curtail the total expenditure.
But still the budget deficit grows.
But the budget deficit grows. If they spend that capital expenditure,
even more.
Okay. But so it is the history. But this time, I think there's about when the last data was released, I think if I remember right, there's only about 30 to 40% has been spent on the capex budget.
Okay.
We have overspent in terms of recurrent, but our revenue targets for this year has been exceptionally good.
Okay.
Excellent. I mean, we have gone beyond the targets I think probably for the first time in the history. Okay. We have collected more money. I mean, we haven't collected more money than our expenditure, but we have collected more money than the budgeted amount.
Than we expected.
So which is a good thing. But of course, we have cut down our capital expenditure. I think there may be multiple reasons. One is, since the government wanted to cut down the expenditure, they probably, as the previous governments, they also looked at curtailing the capital expenditure, because recurrent expenditure you really cannot control, because
you have to.
Exactly, you have to, because it's salaries, pensions. How are you going to cut salaries and pensions? Unless, that's why we advocate for reforms. You can only cut it down by bringing reforms, because the main expenditure item in the budget is the interest payment. How can you bring the interest component down? So you really have very limited choice when it comes to the recurrent expenditure. So when you have a ballooning recurrent expenditure, the only way out is cutting down the capital expenditure. But it comes at a cost, because when you cut down the capital expenditure, the growth will face challenges. So this time it could be for procurement reasons, because all these are quite about ₹1 trillion we expected to spend as capex. So I think 1.2 trillion. That all comes with heavy procurement guidelines. It's not easy to spend money. Look at our Katunayaka, the Bandaranayaka airport expansion. Every time, I mean, for how many years we are trying to, I mean, when there's a competitive bidding, it cancels, and then the bidder, the losing party goes to courts. So it's very difficult to spend money on one side. So because of that, there can be growth challenges. but it could be for procurement reasons. But it's important that we do that necessary capex expenditure on one side, because otherwise on long term the growth can be impacted. So I think that's the conversation that is taking place. But it's important that we prioritize and have a national fiscal plan and spend it accordingly, not to spend ad hocly because of the whims and fancies of the politicians.
So if you were presented with two options of, one, follow the proper procurement guidelines but take an extended period of time to spend this money, or spend the money for capital expenditure just to get the projects up and running, but cut corners on your procurement, maybe spot purchases, so on and so forth. What option do you think is better?
Definitely the procurement process has to be streamlined. I mean, procurement, it has to go through procurement. You cannot proper procurement, cannot cut corners. But the challenge is why it's getting delayed. We really do not have a procurement law, and there was a procurement guideline, and that process is not pretty much streamlined. So while
so actually I'm really unaware of the nitty-gritties of procurement procedure. Of course, there is a procedure that has been put in place, but it is being put in place by executive fiat, I believe. There is no act in Parliament.
Correct.
Comparing the system in Sri Lanka to system in foreign countries, do they have legislation that governs procurement? Is that how countries function?
I mean, when you slowly climb up the ladder and becoming a developed country, basically procurement law is essential.
Procurement law
so
passed by Parliament.
Absolutely. Now at the moment what we have is a guideline, because that's where you bring the competitive nature to the project, because otherwise most of our capex earlier has been unsolicited proposals. You really do not have any cost benefit analysis. You just award it, which is the worst. I mean daylight corruption, and that is also drastically wasting public money on one side, and also bringing the productivity down, because the quality and the necessity of the projects has not been properly evaluated. So that's why we have to have a proper procurement law on one side, and also prioritize the public infrastructure, because then we are running according to a plan, and then we can accelerate. I mean, the procurement process can be, make it efficient, and so then you need not to wait for like years and years to award these contracts. But it's an important milestone, but it only comes through a proper institutional structure.
So are there any plans on the part of the government to bring a procurement law to Sri Lanka and evolve from these guidelines that are created by executive fiat?
There has been a conversation for a long time. I am not aware of what is the next step. There has been a public-private partnership law that has been in conversation, but in terms of procurement law, I think we have to, we are quite behind from the schedule. This was, I'm not very sure. I think it's also a guideline, or like one of the recommendations by the IMF governance diagnostic report as well, because of the importance of the of the law, because that's the mother of all problems, because everyone claims about corruption, handing over contracts to their known parties, political affiliations. That happens when you have an unsolicited bidding system. So that's quite important. That's where my probably that's the area that I said things could have been improved. So actually in the budget speech, the procurement law, the bankruptcy law, of course President spoke about protecting investors, and there's a law and a guideline. So those were there, but I think these are the critical bottlenecks that the policymakers can only solve, because there is no way that you and I can solve it. So it has to come from the Parliament and from the government, and that's where the focus has to be. And even to see results, it will take about 2-3 years, and that's why it's important to start now.
We'll cross over to a short commercial break, and on the other side we'll bring you more about Sri Lanka's economy and what you can expect in the next few years. Stay tuned. You're watching Face to Face.
ලැන්ඩර් 29 පළවෙනිදා සවස 6:30ට මහනුවර ධර්මරාජ විද්‍යාලයේදී නලින් පෙරේරා, නදීමාල් පෙරේරා, මිහිඳු ආර්යරත්න, රයිනි චාරුකා, හිරෝෂි සූර්යසේන, ලක්ෂිත සූර්යසේන, විනුච තරුෂ්ක, වික්ටර්ගේට්, ප්‍රියාගේට්, මధుරජී ගායනු ඇත් ප්‍රවේශපත්‍ර ticketsministry.com.
සර් ඉතින් දෙයියෙක් වගේ අපේ හැම ප්‍රශ්නයකම පිටට ඉන්න ඕනේ සර්.
මේ වගේ කුෂල් ඩිසිෂන් එකක් ගන්න කලින් තමුසර තිබුණා හෙඩ් ඔෆිස් එකට කෝල් කරලා අපෙන් අහන්න.
මේක අර කිගේ මිනිහා ඒකේ කියපු ෆෝන් එකක් නේ.
පිස්සු නැරෙන්නේ. ඔගේ පැකින්ග් වත් කරලා නැහැ.
ඔව් ඒකේ හිතන් ඉන්නේ එහෙමනේ.
සේවකයින්ට මරු කැඳවන විරා සමූහ ව්‍යාපාරයේ නිරා වැඩ.
ඒක අප්ලෝඩ් කරලා තියෙන US.
කොටෝ සතියේ දිනවල රාත්‍රී 9:30ට සිරස ටෙලිතිරයෙන්.
Welcome back. You're watching Face to Face. We're in discussion with Dhananath Fernando, CEO of Advocata. Dhananath, we were discussing about Sri Lanka's economy. Of course, as we look at stabilizing Sri Lanka's economy and getting the economy back on track, the world is not going to wait for us. The issues that Sri Lanka is facing, or the issues that continue to build in Sri Lanka, are not going to wait until our policymakers get their act together, until the citizens of Sri Lanka get their act together, and we finally fix our economy that was in free fall just a few years ago. So moving forward, Dhananath, do you see, especially this budget as well, or at least do you see an interest on the part of our policymakers to address these issues that are building up in the country and we will definitely continue to face in the future? I think, like you were speaking to me just a while ago, the shrinking population in Sri Lanka. Do you see an interest, or at least a want to, or an acknowledgement of these issues that could very well drive our economy to crisis once again?
Absolutely, Charlene, because I think the business community and everyone is worried about debt repayment, currency depreciation, interest rates, which are all matters that we have to worry about for sure. But with some reforms, I think those are issues that you have to worry, but there are bigger long-term challenges at the same time we have to adjust, and as I said, those adjustments cannot be done overnight. It requires a little bit of period because the process is longer. So one main factor is with the recent release of the data on the recent census, the aging population that we have. Because earlier we saw what has happened to our economy with the economic crisis. The next could be a pension crisis, because with the aging population we are slowly shrinking our labor force. And that means, of course, with the technological developments, with the healthcare development, of course our lifespan is going to slowly increase. So that means we have a aging population on one side. At the same time, we want a 7%, 8% growth. So if you look at fundamentals of an economy, you need to have labor, capital, land, and entrepreneurship to run this engine. So without active labor, how are you going to get growth? So that reform has to start now. And at the same time, if you have since we have a large chunk of our labor force in the government sector, and most of them are eligible for a pension, how are we going to finance that pension? Because even now, from the tax revenue, a significant component from our recurrent expenditure is on pensions and salaries. So those reforms takes time, because you cannot send people overnight home. There has to be a gradual process. How are you going to do it? Because otherwise it can come faster to us than we expect on one side. So that's important. But at the same time, we also have to worry about the exchange rate and the debt repayments and all that. But those are also, we have to worry more on a short term. But the long term ones are also, the decision has to be made now So I consider it's urgent because you cannot make that decision last minute without going to a crisis. So that's where we have to be cautious, because if the crisis comes now or in 10 years time, pretty much the impact on your wealth and your living standards are the same. Because the crisis that we had, basically we went back for 10 years. Now we haven't really reached the 2019-18 GDP. So that means after 5-6 years, we are still 6 years behind. Still 6 years behind.
Okay.
So that means like it will take
that 6 years plus those six
exactly
years behind.
Absolutely. so you can imagine the impact. So if we again go for a crisis, we will be probably fall back to where we were at, like 2020-21, probably 24-5. So no point having the same sequence. So that's why that population dynamics has to be considered, and also it affects businesses. For an example, it will affect the retail industry entirely, and there will be some industries which is booming, like the elderly care, and even if you look at clothing, the aspects will change, because there will be more people to buy sort of, the clothing sizes and everything will change, because of course it will change with the spending patterns, because they may not have the spending pattern as an active labor force. So we have to consider a lot of aspects, and that's why it's important the policy makers getting their act together and think a little longer rather than getting into those petty issues, because that's the objective of the legislation. The legislature is to bring those policies and have that longer term view, but mainly based on facts and figures, and proper cost benefit analysis has to be done to begin with.
You were speaking about the public sector, and the fact that we have an oversized public sector. The government has announced plans to recruit more employees into the public sector, and there has been criticism from the opposition. Certain factions in the opposition are calling for all graduates to be employed by the government, to give them guaranteed jobs, so on and so forth. What's your take on this issue in Sri Lanka's job market as far as the public sector is concerned?
This is quite a complicated one, Shalin, because again, I think we really do not have space to accommodate more government workers. But having said that, there may be critical positions which are vacant, where the operation may not be happening because of the absence of the labor. So definitely you have to recruit that. But the complication is, Charlene, the problem is we have failed to attract better talent for the government sector because of the salary scale. So definitely for the decision making government officials to attract quality talent, we have to increase the salaries. That's the truth. But the problem is, how are we going to increase the salaries? Because we have about 1.2 million government sector workforce. So what we need to do is, at the pyramid, and in the pyramid, the bottom is very heavy. There's a lot of political appointments, and I mean, no offense to the type of labor that they contribute, but those are not at the decision making levels. They are just the political, they have given just jobs just for the sake of giving jobs at very low skill levels. So what you need to do is shrink that bottom of the pyramid and save money, and I mean pump that money to increase the salaries of the decision makers. So then they can improve the processes and the efficiency. Now what we have is, we have a massive government sector and we have very low salary scale. So you really cannot recruit or attract people who can really transform the system. As a result, the system is not operating at all, because you have a massive bottom heavy, they cannot do much. You have poorly paid senior members, and the only option that is available is probably for considering corrupt options. So you basically have a very vicious cycle. So you have to start it from the bottom. Of course, it's not very popular. So that's where you have to look at the problem. It's not like whether we have space to accommodate more. So we really
have to make space to accommodate the people we need.
Absolutely, you put it very nicely. We have to make the space to accommodate the right people, and at the same time, at the bottom of the pyramid, you have to improve the skill levels. But all that takes place, Charlene, with economic growth, because even for these people to have better employment opportunities, improve their skills, the economy has to grow at a faster rate, because only when the economy grows there will be more job opportunities
coming up.
So because these people, what are they going to do? They cannot stay at home. So the opportunities at the same time has to be created for these people to slowly move in. So that's why these reforms has to happen parallelly. You cannot just do public sector reform and then move to trade reform. You have to have radical reforms, because only when you
across
do
the board.
Exactly, because when you do the trade reforms where the job market basically activates, and then you bring the cost down, and then you do the public sector reforms, then you do the tax reform, you do it across the board at the same time, then only you can see a result. Because otherwise when you do the public sector reform, there will be no jobs and there will be high inflation, there will be high unemployment. Then people will ask, okay, what's the meaning of this reform? And then probably you have to reverse that reform, because your reform is not supported by the other supporting reforms to accommodate the growth. So that's where the complication is, and that's where the political will has to be there. I think this government has a golden opportunity, because it's just 1 year. In my view it's a little late, but still I think there's space to do that. At least they will see the results before the next election.
So Dhananath, what you're saying is that to right size Sri Lanka's military, Sri Lanka's public sector, you need to create jobs in the private sector to absorb these people. Now we've seen VRS systems being introduced for public sector employees, either to travel overseas while they still retain their grade and their seniority here in Sri Lanka. Have these measures been successful? I know that they are not the kind of reform that you're expecting, but have they been successful? How successful has there been? Is there any information available on that at all?
Sorry Sharon, I really haven't seen any data, or I don't think that data is available publicly even to give a comment based on the statistics whether how successful. But I think as an idea that was in the right direction. What they did was they allowed government sector employees to take no pay leave and go abroad if it's a requirement. But there's also what happened was, when that option was available, the people who had the talent,
they left.
They were the first to leave.
Okay.
Because of course that's how the vicious cycle works. And people who really could not, who were not up to mark with the skill set, they retained. So basically you made the system further inefficient by allowing the talented people to leave. But of course we really did not have another option. Even if you, since you spoke about the military expenditure and all that, now look at, important thing is, it is not about the size of the army, it is about how technically and technologically advanced you are. If you look at what happened in Iran and all those countries, you saw the nature of the war. It is not any longer the soldiers, of course all those war techniques are happening, but it's more AI driven, tech driven war that is now taking place. So what we have to look at is, ultimately it's not the numbers. We probably have to spend more, but on the right things. But to spend on the right things, you have to bring the fiscal space from somewhere, and that can only come through right sizing the government sector and making it more efficient. Because at the moment we are not competitive at all on the government sector reforms, and even we haven't thought about it. At least to an extent we have thought the central bank reforms, we have thought about the tax reforms, tax administration reforms, but on the government sector we really haven't touched on it.
So the size of the public sector, now I too haven't seen any data with regard to this. Has it reduced by any amount? Have you seen any data?
Not to my knowledge. It has been pretty much stagnant about 1.2 million, because there were some recruitments were also done by the previous government. I think there were, for some you really do not have a choice, as I said, because some positions are critical ones. For an example, there was an incident that there were not adequate railway the train drivers or engine drivers. It's a technical job, so for that definitely you have to recruit. So there were instances like that, but I'm not sure what was the criterion. But definitely across the board you really cannot give employment at the government sector for all graduates, or that is definitely not a possibility. Don't forget that we gave a salary hike in the previous budget, and some installments are to be activated from next year onwards. So
further increases.
For further increases. So our expenditure is going to go up, and we have to, it's a taxpayer. You cannot complain on both sides, because when you increase the taxes you complain, But when your expenditure increases, you don't complain. But we have to understand that expenditure increases has to be supported by the tax collection. So it comes back to us.
So, Dhananath, moving forward with regard to Sri Lanka's ease of doing business index. Now, I know that there is a lot of reforms or a lot of changes in the way things function in courts as far as the enforcement procedure is concerned. A lot of effort is being taken to expedite, especially the commercial high court, so that we can attract more foreign investors. On that front, do you think enough is being done?
I can say there's a lot to be done. I mean, I'm sure there must be attempts, which is commendable. What is required is, in my view, I think there was a positive sentiment that they're going to open up new industrial zones, which is, I think, all in the right direction. You have to look at, Charlene, on the investors' mindset. First, for them to be, for us to attract them, the land has to be available. So industrial zones is the right thing. At the moment, there is a shortage of lands. When I say shortage of lands, shortage of industrial lands, because you cannot start a factory or an investment anywhere in the country. There has to be a proper infrastructure to do that. There has to be enough electricity, water, waste management, all that has to be there. Then you have to have labor, and as we all know, labor shortages is a big issue. Third, we have to have the legal system and the court system. If there's a dispute, how are we going to resolve? And then the trade, because anyone to export, they have to import. There is no way that you produce everything under one country and export. So those reforms that comes with customs reforms and all sorts of other reforms. So all that has to happen actually to really transform, because other countries are competing on the same ground. And the free trade agreements and bringing down the tariff rates, because then you get a preferential
market access.
Market access. Now, for an example, India, who is competing with us, now they are going to sign a trade agreement with the EU, which gives the access for about 20 countries in one shot. So overall, they have, I think, free trade agreements for more than 60 countries, approximately. So imagine when an investor comes, if he goes to India, which is like 30-40 kilometers away from Sri Lanka, he has the access for about 60 countries with lower tariff rate. And what's the reason why they should come here? I mean, you have to look at...
They're not going to come here for our beautiful beaches, are they?
Absolutely. So you have to look at on that competitive angle, and that's why I said the reforms are complicated, because you have to do everything in one go. And it's also difficult, because generally our general management approach is you take one at a time. But this is a more complicated one, because only if you do one at a time, most likely it will backfire. Because people will not see the results and they will ask, what's the meaning of...
And then you will have to reverse on that policy, then you try to do the other thing, then the same thing happens there and nothing happens at the end of the day.
And it also gives a message to the investors and others, because when you do one thing and when you reverse, they might be wondering, what are you doing? But at the same time, you also don't understand, it has to happen everything at the same time, otherwise it's difficult. So that's a...
Now, Dhananath, one of the biggest problems that the general public in Sri Lanka also has with the public sector is the lack of efficiency. There are attempts being made to make things more efficient, but we know still, if we go to get a license, if we go to get some government service, rest assured you will have to spend several days. There is a slight reduction in passing some money under the table, but still that has not been completely eliminated also, and I'm pretty sure the general public already knows what I'm speaking about. So I believe investors also face similar situations, and it's the Board of Investment that was introduced as the single window where all investors can get everything done. But what really happened in the past was, once you come to the BOI, you sign an agreement with the BOI saying, okay, we'll do this, these are the targets that you have to meet, you have to do this construction by this date, you have to activate this by that date. And then when that investor goes to the Ministry of Environment or some other ministry to seek approval, that gets delayed, they don't get approval, then they don't deliver on those targets, then the BOI terminates the agreement, then that ends up in arbitration. So that has been the experience for an average investor in Sri Lanka. What has been done to change that?
Yeah. Ideally, what they could have done is the Economic Transformation Act. I mean, I'm not in favor of the entire act. I mean, the bottleneck is keeping that act aside, Charlene. the capacity inside the BOI was limited. It has been publicly admitted by multiple governments because there was not a proper team to attract, write an investment proposal and attract and canvas and bring the investment. If you look at comparatively,
but Dhananath, you're talking on the marketing side. I'm talking about investors who have come to the BOI, entered into agreements and not been able to materialize their investment or capitalize on their investment or build whatever they want to build in Sri Lanka because of several other issues that of course the BOI also didn't address by liaising with these authorities.
No, I was coming for that. The reason is, since one side you don't have a team, and even when you bring someone, the BOI really do not have the other supporting capacity or like the legal authority to make it happen.
So they don't even have links with the other ministries, no channels to discuss with the other ministries.
It's very weak. And that's why we basically recommended that you give it, that the better way is the industrial zones and even allowing the private industrial zones, because industrial zone, it's like a plug and play environment. Because if an investor comes to the BOI, the investor has to go and figure out pretty much how to get the electricity. Water management, or BOI may assist, but even if the BOI goes, the electricity board has no reason why they have to give the priority to the BOI.
Or preferential treatment, nothing. So they treat them as just another person.
Absolutely. So then that's where the delay comes in. But if you have an industrial zone, so it's a plug and play, everything has been installed beforehand. So then you can basically make it a turnaround, and even if it's privately managed, if the government can manage, that's a separate story. But then it could have been accelerated. But the challenge has been how to declare the land and all that. So that has to be accelerated. And on the other side, as I mentioned, because ultimately investors are the same type of people, no, Charlene? You bring one investor, he brings his other, input manufacturer as a factory to, close by it to cut down the cost, and then he expands, he starts another factory. It's all while there are multiple entities, it can be, of course, there will be new investors, but it's also that investor, it's like the lawyers,
it's the investor circle.
Exactly, it's like the lawyer circle, it's the investor circle. The message goes around whether it's easy to invest here or not. So when you really do not have that capacity, basically we are not attracting enough. Our investment numbers are quite we hardly do $1 billion a year. It's generally, we haven't done 2-3 billion, probably for the last 10-15 years. Even if I recall right, where we did 1 billion was when we did that Hambantota port debt to equity swap. So definitely we deserve better, but for that we have to have that ecosystem. I think one way to look at it is that investment also comes, as I said, with the trade agreements, with easy custom regulations, because all has to import, export. That's where the investor basically comes in, and also having access for labor, better legal system on disputes and all that. So it's you have to look at the 360 view rather than just trying to fix like one problem, or if you try to make the BOI efficient, probably it will be another failed attempt. So you have to bring that legislation and all that to really make it happen. That's where again the complication takes place.
Now we're really looking at attracting foreign investment to Sri Lanka. So what has been done in that aspect? I know you said that there are several things that have to be done at once, but one of those things is making the BOI more efficient, or introducing something else as a single window system where an investor can come and invest his money with ease. Has there been any steps taken for that aspect in the many aspects that you said that needs to be?
What I saw so far was the declaration or like willingness to open new industrial zones. Even President in his budget speech mentioned, indicated even the private sector can run it, and allocating a lot of land for IT parks, for these data centers and all that. It's definitely in the right direction. So that is good. Execution is key. Second is the investor protection law that the President spoke about, that providing that assurance that we will not expropriate any private land and all that. That is also in the right direction. So those two are commendable. But you have to look at the labor front and the ease of doing business, the customs procedures more in detail, while these two are in the right direction.
Now, there is a call from the opposition to provide more concessions to the general public, as always is. We saw the opposition leader saying, we've recovered about 15.9%. 15% was our target on taxes, but we've got 0.9% more. This 0.9% should be, returned to the people in one form or another. Do you think that is really a viable way to move forward? Should they be kept as a buffer?
Yeah, I mean, generally, as a percentage of GDP, generally 15-16% taxes is what is recommended, but there are debate around it, like what's the exact amount. Our challenge has been, Charlene, why we need about 15-16%. As I mentioned, most of our expenditure is on the interest. So as we all know, even while maybe we have 15%, our expenditure is
much
always higher. Exactly going beyond the budget. So as a result, ideally you should have a buffer, but the reality is that it has to be shouldered by the common people. What we should do is, I can confidently say, whether it's 15.9 or whether it's 16%, it has to come through improving the tax administration, because there's a lot of leakage that is taking place because of the poor tax administration. That has to be fixed, but not by increasing the taxes. So in this time, how they plan to get 15.9% is not increasing. I mean, there's no new taxes, there's no new tax increases. The only change has been the VAT threshold has brought down. SSCL threshold has brought down. So that's the two main ways that they are planning to
broaden the net.
Also broaden the net and improve the efficiency. That can only come through the digitization, because that's where you really do a proper evaluation of your tax paying capacity, you capture the revenue and all that. But ideally, in ideal world, the government should slowly move out of business, because then the cash that they need becoming less and lesser. They can invest definitely on the public infrastructure, the public goods, health, education, those can be the priority, but not to do businesses and not to intervene unnecessarily. Leave it to the private sector where the players can provide that function more efficiently. And then you basically cut down the need for expenditure, because the more you add, it multiplies and adds on, because if you recruit someone, you have to pay pensions, this benefit, that benefit, all sorts of things. So you have to curtail the expenditure front, because it's like all of us, Charlene, generally as a joke I say, when I was an intern, I earned a smaller salary, but of course I did much more than my current salary, because ultimately your expenditure catches up faster than you expect, because your lifestyle was different, you have different set of needs. So just by increasing the expenditure, you cannot expect the income to catch up. You have to curtail your expenditure, then you can manage the balances. Otherwise, no salary, for most people, they ask for a salary increment, but after the increment, basically you have enough expenditure already to capture with that the increment. So that's where we have to be quite cautious when we think about the expenditure front.
It's got a sharp double-edged sword. Thank you very much, Dhananath Fernando, Chief Executive Officer at Advocata, for joining us on our program and being so succinct in your explanations. Very, very easy to grasp, and I'm pretty sure our viewers would also have understood the complexities or the very complex matters that Dhananath broke down to very simple terms. Thank you very much once again for taking time off your busy schedule. Thank you very much to all our viewers out there for tuning in to another episode of Face to Face. Until we meet again, take care and God bless.